A young nurse accidentally got pregnant by a homeless man after inviting him to a corporate gala. All her colleagues laughed at her. Until he showed up one early morning. A raw March wind drove the icy slush across the asphalt. Evening had fallen on the city quickly, bringing a biting cold that even heavy winter coats couldn't keep out. At the main entrance of an elite private hospital in Chicago, the dim lights of an old ambulance flashed. Two exhausted, freezing paramedics shifted from foot to foot next to a gurney. On it lay an unconscious man. His dark clothing was covered in patches of wet mud. The chief of surgery, Dr. Victor Langley, stood at the top of the wide concrete steps. He casually flicked the ash from his slim cigarette, pulling his expensive cashmere coat tighter around himself. "Get him off my porch immediately. You boys have the wrong address. This is an elite private medical center, not a homeless shelter." Dr. Langley said in a flat, oppressive voice. There was no anger in his tone. Only icy, arrogant disgust. The older paramedic, his face red and windburned, let out a heavy sigh and pulled off his knit beanie. "Dr. Langley, where are we supposed to take him right now? The county hospitals are at capacity. People are lying in the hallways. We picked him up on the interstate with a severe head trauma. This man won't survive the night on the streets. Just admit him to the ER so he can warm up. I don't care about the county hospital's problems." Dr. Langley took a drag and slowly exhaled the smoke into the freezing air. "I have patients in this facility paying more for a single night's stay than you make in a month. I don't need this trash on my doorstep. Dump him at a bus stop or take him to the police station." 21-year-old registered nurse Allison Nelson, who had just stepped out to escort a discharged patient, stopped dead at the sliding glass doors. She heard every single word. Allie had only been working here for 6 months. But she just couldn't get used to how easily these people stepped right over someone else's misery. She wore a clean but heavily worn, mended white scrub jacket. The young woman lived in poverty, under the constant pressure of her overbearing mother. But she had learned one rule since childhood: you never abandon the weak. The paramedic waved to his partner, and they reached for the gurney to load the man back into the freezing back of the ambulance. "Stop!" Allie's voice cracked. She hadn't expected such boldness from herself. She quickly hurried down the icy steps and literally shielded the gurney with her own body. The wind immediately whipped at her light brown hair, which was pulled back into a tight ponytail. The cold pierced right through her thin scrubs. But she didn't even shiver. "What are you doing?" Allie looked at the paramedics, then raised a stubborn gaze to Dr. Langley. "He has a head laceration, and his pulse is probably weak. He'll literally freeze to death. We are obligated to provide first aid." Behind the glass doors in the brightly lit lobby, hospital staff began to stop and stare. Dr. Langley absolutely despised it when junior staff dared to contradict him, especially in front of an audience. He slowly stepped down one stair and stood directly in front of Allie. A thick scent of expensive cologne radiated from the surgeon. "Nelson, you seem to have forgotten your job description." Dr. Langley looked down at her. "Your job is to hang IV bags when you're told. Step away from the gurney." "No." Allie gripped the metal railing of the gurney with pale fingers. "I won't let you do this." Dr. Langley tilted his head slightly to the side. A thin, unpleasant smirk appeared on his lips. "Want to play savior? Be my guest. Take this stray mutt home with you. But if I see even a single drop of mud in the hallways of my wing, you're fired tonight. And no union rep will be able to save you." He threw his cigarette butt into the ashcan in disgust, turned around, and walked back into the brightly lit building. The paramedics guiltily threw up their hands. Look. Kid. We gotta go. We have dispatch breathing down our necks. The older medic said quietly. You're on your own. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The rig backed up and quickly disappeared around the corner. Allie was left completely alone in the freezing wind next to the motionless man. Tears welled up in her eyes from a sense of absolute injustice and helplessness. Grown. Educated professionals had just calmly left a human being to die. She felt deeply ashamed for them. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand. Grabbed the rails of the gurney. And, breathing heavily, pushed it around the main building toward the maintenance yard. That was where the old brick boiler room was located. The hospital had switched to modern heating systems years ago. But this utility space remained. It was always dry, warm, and smelled of heated dust. But most importantly, management never went down there. Allie struggled to push open the heavy metal door, rolled the gurney inside, and flipped the light switch. A dim bulb flickered on near the ceiling. She locked the deadbolt and finally exhaled. The man lay motionless. Allie stepped closer. She acted quickly and precisely, just like she did in the trauma bay. First, she needed to get his wet, mud-caked jacket off him. Allie carefully pulled at the sleeve. Once the jacket was resting on a wooden crate, she grabbed some gauze and antiseptic from her pocket and poured warm water into an old metal basin. She began washing the dirt from his face. It was right then that she noticed the first inconsistencies. Usually, people brought in from the streets in this condition had a heavy, lingering smell of unwashed bodies and cheap liquor. This man didn't smell of alcohol at all. Allie looked at his hands. His nails were clipped short and clean. His fingers were long and straight. There were no rough calluses on his palms, which always gave away a man who had spent years doing manual labor or living on the streets. He had strong, aristocratic features, a straight nose, sharply defined cheekbones. Even beneath the layer of exhaustion, she could sense a certain refined upbringing in him. She picked up his jacket to hang it closer to the radiator. The fabric caught on the edge of the crate, and a heavy metal object fell from a deep inner pocket, clattering loudly against the concrete floor. Allie bent down. It was a massive Zippo-style lighter, made of dark metamite. On its cool surface, an elegant engraving stood out clearly. I.S. From the gurney. A quiet, ragged groan echoed. Allie instantly turned around and mechanically slipped the lighter back into the inner pocket of his wet jacket. The man slowly turned his head. His eyelids fluttered. He struggled to open his eyes. Allie expected to see a cloudy or aggressive gaze, but he looked perfectly lucid. In his dark eyes, there was only sharp pain and absolute confusion. "Where am I?" he asked. His voice was deep, with a slight rasp, but his diction was surprisingly proper and clear. "You're safe." Allie sat on the edge of a chair next to him and gently placed a hand on his shoulder so he wouldn't try to get up. "You're at a hospital." "Sort of. I took you in from the ambulance. You have a cut on your head. I cleaned it up." The man frowned. A deep crease appeared on his forehead. He looked at the humming pipes, the old brick walls, and then shifted his gaze to the girl in the white scrubs. "What is your name? Do you remember?" Allie asked quietly. He closed his eyes. His breathing quickened. His fingers nervously gripped the edge of the old blanket she had draped over him. Several long seconds passed. "I don't know." He opened his eyes. Rising panic, visible in them. "It's empty. There's just darkness. A few flashes. The cold. The highway. Ian." He fell silent, staring at the ceiling. Allie glanced at the wet jacket lying by the radiator. In the inner pocket was the heavy engraved lighter. I.S. Ian. Shh. Calm down, she said in a steady, reassuring tone. This happens often after a head trauma. It's retrograde amnesia. Your memory will definitely come back. You just need to give your body time. So. Your name is Ian. Nice to meet you. I'm Ellie. Right now. You need to sleep. I'll be right here. The man looked at her as if those simple words were the only solid ground left in his crumbling world. He gave a short nod and obediently closed his eyes. 2 weeks passed. March continued to rage with freezing night temperatures. Ian stayed living at the hospital. Allie showed incredible stubbornness and struck a deal with Pete, the head of maintenance. The old man was always short on help. And suddenly, he had a strong, completely sober guy, willing to do any dirty work just for a bowl of soup and a place to sleep in the boiler room. The staff quickly got used to the new resident of the maintenance yard. Among themselves, the nurses and orderlies called him the stray. Brenda, a heavy-set custodian, loved to stand by the break room window with a mug of coffee and comment on his work. Would you look at that stray? She would drawl, watching Ian use a crowbar to chip ice away from the emergency exit, swinging that iron like a machine. Our little Nelson got herself a pet, feeding him out back. Ugh. Pathetic. Found herself a boyfriend right on her level. A beggar and a bum. Ali, organizing ampoules in the supply cabinet, would only clench her jaw tighter. She knew that answering Brenda would only give her a reason to start new rumors. Every free minute she had. Ali went down to the boiler room. She brought Ian food, buying it with her own meager savings. She brought him clean clothes from the local thrift store. Watching him, Ali grew more and more amazed. When she brought him hot soup in a plastic container, he didn't attack the food. Even if he had been doing manual labor all day, he ate neatly, keeping his back unnaturally straight. If Ali accidentally tripped over the threshold, he was instantly by her side, catching her elbow and politely offering his hand. These gestures, hardwired into his muscle memory, revealed a man from a completely different world. Their late-night conversations became Ali's only escape. They sat on overturned wooden crates next to the humming boilers. Ali told him things she would never trust her colleagues with. She talked about her overbearing mother, who constantly berated her for being poor and demanded she find a rich husband. About how hard it was to work in a place where people were treated like ATMs. Ian listened intently. His dark eyes never left her face. He had no past of his own to share in return. His mind remained a blank slate. You're very strong, Ali, he said one day, in his steady, calm voice. You're the only person in this building who looks at me like a living human being. I don't know who I was before, but what you're doing for me now, I will never forget it. The end of March was particularly grueling. The hospital was expecting a major inspection from the state medical board. Management was on edge, taking out their anger on the junior staff. It was late evening. Ali had stayed behind in the nurses' station, filling out patient logs. The wing was completely silent. Suddenly, the door creaked, and Dr. Langley walked into the small room. He was wearing perfectly pressed surgical scrubs. He stopped at the entrance, put his hands in his pockets, and slowly, calculatingly looked Ali over. His gaze made her skin crawl. She hastily closed the logbook and stood up. Dr. Langley, do you need something? The chart for the patient in bed 3 is on the desk. Langley didn't answer. He took 2 steps forward, getting uncomfortably close. Ali instinctively stepped back until her shoulders hit the cold metal of the filing cabinet. You know, Nelson, I've been watching you for a while. Langley lowered his voice. You're a pretty girl. A hard worker. But you always look exhausted. Your scrubs are faded. Why do you take these night shifts for pennies? I'm fine with my job. Ali answered dryly, trying to step around him. Excuse me. I need to go hang an IV. Langley suddenly slammed his hand against the cabinet, right next to her face, cutting off her path to the door. Don't be in such a rush. He leaned in closer. I'm the chief of surgery. I make the calls around here. Be a little more accommodating with me, and I'll move you to better shifts. You could buy yourself some decent clothes instead of walking around in rags. Think about it. His hand slowly reached for her shoulder. Inside, Ali's stomach tied into knots from a sharp sense of humiliation. Get your hands off me. Ali slapped his forearm away, pushing past him, taken by surprise. Langley stumbled back. His respectable mask instantly dropped, revealing a vicious, cruel corps. Who do you think you're talking to? He hissed, his face breaking out in red splotches. Tomorrow morning. You're scrubbing toilets in the biohazard wing. Ali didn't stay to listen. She slipped into the hallway and walked briskly toward the stairwell, leading to the back exit. Tears of resentment and anger at her own defenselessness choked her. Ian was standing at the bottom of the stairs. He had just finished hauling construction debris out of the basement. Seeing Ali running down the stairs, hiding her face in her hands, he was instantly by her side. Ali. What happened? Who did this? His voice turned hard, his muscles tensed. She shook her head, trying to hold back a sob. She was too ashamed to tell him what had just happened. Nothing. I'm just tired. Ian looked up at the brightly lit stairwell. Every instinct in his body screamed to go up there and destroy whoever had made her cry. His fists clenched. But a split second later, a sharp sense of powerlessness stopped him. Who was he? A homeless man. A day laborer with no name and no ID. If he caused a scene right now, he wouldn't protect Ali, he would only give management an excuse to fire her in disgrace. The helplessness burned him from the inside out. He looked at the girl, feeling a dark, heavy promise forming in his chest. No matter what it took, he had to remember everything. If only so that no one would ever dare hurt her again. Let's go, Ian said quietly. He didn't press her for answers. He just gently took her elbow and led her toward the safe warmth of the boiler room. May turned out to be unusually warm. Almost hot for that time of year. The trees around the private hospital grounds were already covered in thick, fresh leaves, and the breeze blowing through the open windows of the break room carried the sweet scent of blooming lilacs. But inside the room, where almost the entire shift had gathered after morning rounds, it was stifling from tension and boredom. Dr. Samuel Owens, the hospital administrator, a heavy-set man, with a permanent red mark on his nose, from his thick glasses stood by the magnetic scheduling board, monotonously reading administrative updates. And finally, colleagues. This Friday, our medical center is celebrating its 15th anniversary. Dr. Owen's voice was dry, as if he were reading a pathology report instead of a party invitation. The board of directors has rented the grand ballroom at the Astoria. Attendance is strictly mandatory for all staff, from janitors to department heads. There will be sponsors, city officials, and journalists. Dress code is formal. The seating charts are already finalized. You can get them from the head nurse. Ali stood right by the door, clutching a plastic clipboard to her chest. She was desperately hoping to slip away, unnoticed the second the meeting ended. She had a few free minutes before her IV rounds. And she wanted to run down to the boiler room to bring Ian a portion of lunch she had saved from the cafeteria. But the moment Owens mentioned the seating chart, Dr. Langley, sitting in the front row, slowly turned around in his leather chair. The surgeon was wearing a flawlessly pressed white lab coat over an expensive dress shirt. He casually crossed his legs and, completely hiding nothing of his smug, possessive smirk, looked across the room straight at Allie. Dr. Owens, make one small adjustment to the list. Loudly. So that every single person in the room can hear it clearly. Langley declared. Seat Nurse Nelson at my table. Right next to me. A quiet murmur instantly rippled through the break room. The doctors exchanged glances. Brenda the custodian, standing not far from Allie, knowingly nudged her coworker with an elbow and covered her mouth with a wide hand to hide a nasty smile. Everyone in the department knew exactly how things worked. Langley was unmarried, wealthy, and considered himself the absolute master of the domain. Everyone understood exactly what a public invitation to his table meant for a young nurse. It wasn't even a hint, it was a claim of ownership right in front of the entire staff. Allie felt hot. Prickly blood rushed to her cheeks. Her fingers gripped the plastic clipboard so tightly that the hard edges bit painfully into her palms. She looked at the surgeon. In his light eyes, she could read the absolute, unwavering confidence of a man who was used to just taking whatever he wanted. It didn't even cross his mind that she would dare refuse. To him, she was just a poor girl in faded scrubs, easily controlled with the fear of being fired or the promise of a bonus. I will not sit at your table. Dr. Langley. Allie's voice trembled, betraying her panic. But she forced herself to lift her chin and look the surgeon dead in the face. The murmurs in the room instantly died. Langley tilted his head slightly. His smile grew thinner and uglier. Is that so? He drawled with exaggerated politeness. And what exactly is our reason for violating the chain of command at a corporate event? Nelson. There was no turning back. The fear of public humiliation mixed with a sharp, suffocating anger at the sheer injustice of it all. Allie straightened her back. Her thoughts raced. And before she could think of the consequences, she blurted out the first thing that came to mind as a lifeline. I won't be coming alone. I'm bringing my fiancé. And we will sit wherever there are 2 open seats. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of cars outside the window. Dr. Owens cleared his throat uncomfortably and adjusted his glasses. He hated unprovoked conflict. Langley slowly looked Allie up and down with a long, calculating gaze that made her want to shrink into herself and hide. A fiancé, the surgeon drawled, his voice dripping with open, malicious mockery. Wow. What breaking news. Well then, Nelson. We eagerly look forward to meeting your chosen one. Let's just hope he at least knows how to use silverware in polite society. Behind her back, Brenda openly snorted. Allie didn't reply. She spun around, pushed the door open, and walked out into the hallway, feeling her ears burning and her knees shaking uncontrollably. She walked quickly toward the back exit, only when she was outside, taking deep breaths of the warm spring air, did she fully realize the horrifying trap she had just walked into. She didn't have a fiancé. She didn't have anyone at all. Her entire life consisted of grueling shifts and her mother's constant nagging at home. And now, if she showed up to the gala alone, Langley would destroy her with ridicule. Brenda would spread the story through the entire hospital, turning her daily life into an unbearable nightmare of gossip and bullying. But she couldn't just not go. Doctor. Owen strictly enforced mandatory attendance. She walked down the familiar concrete steps to the boiler room. Ian was there. He was breaking down old wooden pallets, preparing them for kindling. Seeing Allie, he immediately dropped his tools. Over these 2 spring months of physical labor and regular meals, he had bulked up significantly. His shoulders were broad, his movements more precise and confident. Though the same heavy, hollow sorrow of a man, without a past still hid in his dark eyes. "You're very pale." He stepped closer, wiping his hands on the rough fabric of his cargo pants. "Did something happen upstairs? Did he bother you again?" Allie sat down on an overturned wooden crate, placed the food container next to her, and covered her face with her hands. She was mortified to ask him for this. "Ian, I need your help. A lot. But it sounds stupid. And it's incredibly selfish of me." She told him everything, sparing no details. Langley's arrogant stare, the meeting, the mocking laughs of the staff, and her impulsively about a fiancé. The man listened in silence, never interrupting. His face remained serious and focused. "You see, I have to go. The administrator will fire me for insubordination." Allie looked up at him with a desperate, guilty gaze. "And I can't go alone now either. I'll buy you clothes. The cheapest ones from the thrift store, but clean and ironed. Please. Just play along. Just sit next to me for a couple of hours. Nobody will recognize you in a normal suit." She fully expected him to refuse. Who would willingly walk into a room full of people who looked at him like a pack mule or street trash every day? But Ian nodded without a second thought, without heavy sighs or unnecessary questions. "Okay, Ali. I'll go with you." The entire next day was spent in feverish preparation. Ali withdrew her last bit of savings from her debit card money she had been setting aside for new work shoes. She spent 2 hours in a cheap thrift store on the edge of town, sifting through endless racks until she found a dark navy blazer and dress pants. She also bought a plain white button-down shirt and a pack of disposable razors. That evening, 2 hours before the gala, she brought the bags to the boiler room. Ian had already washed up with cold tap water. He was standing in front of a small, cracked mirror nailed to the brick wall, carefully shaving off his thick beard. Ali froze in the doorway. Without the facial hair, his features became much sharper and far more striking. A heavy, strong jawline, clearly defined cheekbones, a straight nose. "The clothes are on the chair," she said quietly, stepping inside. "But we need to do something about your hair. It's too long." She pulled a pair of sharp medical scissors and a plastic comb from her scrub pocket. Ian sat on a wooden stool, obediently bowing his head. Ali draped an old but clean towel over his broad shoulders and stood behind him. It was a strange, highly unusual feeling for both of them. Ali gently ran the teeth of the comb through his thick, dark hair. It was coarse, smelling of plain bar soap, but perfectly clean. She made the first cut. The metal blades snipped quietly right by his ear. She tried to work quickly and focus on evening out the edges. But the longer the process took, the more the atmosphere in the cramped boiler room shifted. The space between them seemed to shrink, becoming dense. To trim his bangs, Ali had to step around to the front and stand very close to him. She could physically feel the heat radiating from his body. Ian never took his eyes off her face. His dark eyes watched her every movement intently, studying the curve of her lips, the sweep of her eyelashes. Ali leaned in a little closer, focusing on the unruly strands at his temple, and suddenly realized with a jolt of panic that her fingers were trembling. She felt his steady, calm breath against her wrist. The smell of heated dust in the old boiler room mixed completely with the scent of clean soap and something elusive. Masculine. Sharp. And reliable. Close your eyes. Her voice came out lower and quieter than usual. The cut hair will get in them. He obeyed. Ali gently brushed the hair off his forehead. Her palm lingered on his warm skin for a fraction of a second. Ian suddenly opened his eyes and caught her hand. His long fingers wrapped around her wrist. Not painfully, but very firmly, stopping her from pulling away, for several long seconds. They just looked at each other in the dim light of the boiler room. There was an electric tension in that direct gaze that could no longer be explained away as simple gratitude for a saved life. Or pity. Ali was the first to look away, unable to bear the intensity, and gently freed her hand. Done. Get dressed. We have to go. Or we'll be late. The Astoria restaurant welcomed them with the muted light of massive crystal chandeliers, soft jazz music, and the steady hum of dozens of voices. The hospital was throwing a lavish party. Women in evening gowns, smelling of sweet perfume, and men in tailored suits stood in small groups, holding champagne flutes. Ali felt completely out of place. She was wearing a simple, modest dark cherry dress she had bought 3 years ago for her nursing school graduation. It looked painfully plain against the designer outfits of the doctors. She gripped her purse tightly, standing just inside the entrance, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her whole. But the moment they took a few steps into the room, the atmosphere began to shift imperceptibly. The chatter began to die down. First, the nurses near the buffet table went quiet, then the internal medicine doctors turned around. Brenda, holding an appetizer halfway to her mouth, froze with her jaw hanging open, never taking the bite. People weren't looking at Ali. All eyes were glued to her date. The cheap, thrift store navy suit fit Ian so perfectly it looked as if it had been custom tailored on Savile Row. Broad shoulders, a straight back, flawless posture. But the most striking thing was his face. Clean shaven, with a neat, sharp haircut. It radiated an absolute, quiet dignity. He didn't slouch. He didn't look around nervously. And he didn't shove his hands in his pockets like someone who had just walked into an expensive alien world. He moved through the crowd so smoothly and confidently. It was as if he owned the luxury restaurant himself. It was impossible to recognize the beaten-down stray from the maintenance yard in this man. This was a completely different person. A man accustomed to luxury, power, and respect. Dr. Langley was standing by the bar with Dr. Owens, seeing Ali and her date. The surgeon narrowed his eyes slightly, his jaw tightening. He grabbed 2 snifters of dark liquor from a passing waiter's tray and, with a slow, arrogant swagger, walked directly toward the couple to intercept them. Nelson, you actually showed up. Langley stopped in front of them, intentionally ignoring Ian and staring only at the girl. Charming dress. Vintage. Ali opened her mouth to reply to the insult, but Ian calmly stepped in front of her. It was one simple, incredibly fluid movement of his arm, effectively cutting Langley off from her. Good evening. Ian's voice was deep and steady. Langley finally shifted his gaze to him. The surgeon tried to maintain a condescending, mocking smile, but visible irritation flashed in his eyes. He held one of the glasses out to Ian. Let's drink to getting acquainted. This is a vintage French cognac, brought out specifically for the VIP guests of the hospital. I'm sure you've never tasted anything like this in your life. Ian took the glass. He didn't take a sip. Instead, He smoothly swirled the crystal in his hand, watching the dark liquid leave oily legs on the glass. Then he brought it to his face and took a barely noticeable sniff. "You are absolutely right. I have never tasted this," Ian said calmly, looking the surgeon dead in the eye. "Because this isn't vintage French cognac. It's a very cheap blend. A harsh ethanol smell with burnt caramel added for color. You might be able to disinfect surgical tools with this, but I wouldn't recommend anyone actually drink it." Langley's face broke out in ugly red blotches. Several doctors standing nearby, who had heard the entire exchange, fell into an awkward silence and looked away. "What the hell do you know?" the surgeon hissed, his respectable mask slipping as he shifted into naked aggression. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" Ian set the untouched glass down on the nearest cocktail table. He took a half step forward, standing almost chest to chest with the surgeon. Even though Langley was a tall man, he had to tilt his head up slightly to look Ian in the face. "I know that I am looking at a man who tries to inflate his own ego at the expense of defenseless junior staff," Ian said quietly, but very clearly. The words dropped heavy and sharp. "And remember this, never dare raise your voice at my woman again. It reveals a deep inferiority complex that no job title will ever fix for you." He didn't wait for an answer or a reaction from Langley. Ian simply took Allie's arm and confidently led her through the parting crowd toward an empty table in the back. The chief of surgery was left standing in the middle of the room with a glass in his hand. His knuckles were white from tension. In that moment, he looked pathetic and ridiculous. And all his subordinates saw it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Allie. She barely touched her food. She could feel dozens of curious, envious stares from her colleagues. But she didn't care. She only looked at the man sitting next to her. The way he confidently handled his knife and fork. The way he dabbed his lips with the cloth napkin. The way he politely and succinctly answered the small talk questions from their tablemates. Everything about him screamed high society. His memory had abandoned him. He didn't even know his own last name. But the manners and habits ingrained by years of elite upbringing remained untouched. They left long before the banquet ended, right as the loud dancing started, and most of the doctors had already had too much to drink. Allie said she needed to swing by the hospital. She had left her apartment keys in her locker in the break room. Outside, it was very warm and quiet. They walked to the hospital grounds on foot. Inside the building, it was dark. Only the emergency lights were on. Passing the nurse's station, Allie opened the door to the break room. The space was lit only by the dim glow of a street lamp filtering through the window. She walked over to her metal locker, pulled out her purse, closed the door, and turned around. Ian was standing in the doorway. He hadn't turned on the overhead light. In the soft night shadows, his silhouette looked even larger and more protective. The adrenaline that had kept Allie tense all evening began to fade, leaving a strange, heavy weakness in her legs and a wildly beating heart. "You were incredible tonight," she said quietly, taking a slow step toward him. "I don't know how to thank you, Langley. He'll never come near me again." Ian stepped toward her. The distance between them vanished. "You have nothing to thank me for, Ali." He raised his hand and very carefully, with just his fingertips, touched her cheek. That simple, weightless touch made the girl's breath catch in her throat. "I don't know my past." His voice was hollow, almost a whisper, filling the silence of the break room. "I don't remember faces, names, friends, or family. There is pitch black emptiness in my head. But I know one thing for sure. You were the only one who saw a living human being when I was lying in the freezing mud. You didn't turn away. And right now, my present and my future is only you. He leaned down, and his lips met hers. At first, it was gentle, as if he were afraid of startling her. Asking a silent question. Allie closed her eyes and kissed him back. All doubts, fears, and thoughts about how crazy or wrong this was melted away in the spring darkness. His strong, confident hands pulled her close. There was so much pent-up tenderness in that embrace. So much unspoken loneliness on both sides. That they simply couldn't stop. It was a night of absolute, sincere trust between two people who had found salvation in each other. The dark hospital corridor was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Brenda, the custodian, heading home from the gala, had decided to stop by the clinic. She realized she had left her favorite knit shawl in the supply closet. Walking down the hall past the break room, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. Brenda stopped and listened. In the dead of night, the quiet voices, heavy breathing, and rustling of clothes were distinct. The custodian walked up to the door without making a sound, careful not to step on any creaky floorboards, and pressed her eye against the narrow crack. In the dim streetlight, she saw Allie Nelson and that guy from the boiler room. Brenda's face twisted into a vicious, triumphant grimace. She slowly backed away from the door. She had just been handed the ultimate trump card, one capable of destroying the reputation of the proud nurse who had dared to show up to the gala with a gorgeous man and rub it in Langley's face. And Brenda knew exactly how she was going to use it the very next morning. The morning began with a profound sense of wrongness. Allie opened her eyes and stared blankly at the white hospital ceiling, noting the peeling paint in the corner. She was lying on the narrow vinyl couch in the break room. Her white scrub jacket hung over the back of a nearby chair. She sat up abruptly. The blanket she had been covered with slid to the linoleum. The room smelled of medical alcohol and cold instant coffee. But the scent of clean soap and masculine warmth that had filled this space just hours ago was completely gone. Ian, Allie called out softly. Certain, he had just stepped out to wash up or change. No answer. Only the hum of the mini-fridge in the corner. She quickly threw on her scrubs, smoothed her messy hair, and peeked out into the hallway. It was empty. The night shift was just starting to hand over their duties. The day doctors were still changing in the locker rooms. Allie checked the nurse's station. Then the supply room. No one. A sickening, pulling sense of dread began to bloom in her chest. She ran down the stairs to the back exit and pushed open the heavy metal door of the boiler room. Inside, the pipes hummed. It was stuffy and smelled of familiar dust. Allie scanned the room. The wooden crate they usually sat on was in its place. But the old plastic razor on the shelf was gone. The brush Ian used to clean his boots had disappeared. But on the bottom shelf sat a tightly packed plastic bag, containing his old, mud-stained jacket, and the clothes Allie had washed and neatly folded for him months ago. That detail hurt the most. It was as if he had walked away into a new life, leaving her with nothing but his past. Allie slowly sank onto the crate. It was hard to breathe. Dozens of thoughts swarmed in her head, each more terrifying than the last. Security chased him away. He went to the store and got lost. He collapsed on the street. But the absence of his few personal items told a different story. He packed up and left on his own. After her shift, Allie took the bag of clothes home. Not out of hope, but because she couldn't bring herself to throw away the last thing she had left of him. She arrived back on the floor right as the morning huddle was ending. The hallway was already full of people. Doctors in fresh lab coats were drinking coffee. Nurses were rattling medication carts. Allie walked toward the station, her head bowed low, trying not to look at anyone. She just needed to survive the end of her shift. Near the glass doors of the surgical wing stood Brenda. The custodian was holding a mop. But she wasn't cleaning the floor. She was enthusiastically gossiping with two young nurses. Seeing Allie, Brenda stopped talking. The women turned their heads in sync. And in their eyes was naked, undisguised mockery. At that moment, the elevator doors slid open. And Dr. Victor Langley stepped out into the hallway. He was wearing an expensive dark suit with a flawless white lab coat thrown casually over it. The surgeon was clearly in a foul mood. The previous night's public humiliation at the restaurant was still etched into the tense line of his mouth. He stopped in the middle of the corridor. His gaze landed on a pale, lost-looking Allie. And then on the whispering nurses. Brenda coughed meaningfully, took a step toward the surgeon, and muttered something quietly to him. Langley's face stretched in surprise for a second. And then a wide, vicious smile played on his lips. He slowly walked over to Allie. The nurses around them froze, anticipating a scandal. The chatter in the hallway died down. Well, Nelson. The surgeon's voice boomed across the entire wing. Loud, clear, intentionally drawing a crowd. You look terrible. Sleepless night, Allie's head shot up. Her fingers gripped the edge of the nurse's station counter in a death grip. Dr. Langley. I need to prep IVs for room 4. Your IVs can wait. Langley took another step, closing the distance. He was openly savoring his dominance. I was just informed of some very interesting news. Rumor has it your date from last night, that distinguished aristocrat, vanished before dawn. Allie felt the heat rush to her face. While her hands turned ice cold, she stayed silent, unable to force a single sound past her lips. And to think, I warned you. Langley looked around at the gathered audience, raising his voice even louder. Your little stray woke up this morning, realized you had plans to trap him, and ran for the hills. Nelson here serviced the local mutt right in the break room. And the second he got his bone, he bolted. That's how they all are. Found a warm place for the night. And by morning, he's off to the next subway grate. One of the younger nurses snickered into her fist. Brenda laughed out loud, flashing her gold crowns. Others joined in the laughter. The sound was physically agonizing and deeply shameful for Allie. The people she worked side by side with were laughing at her crushed pride and shattered trust. Langley stood in front of her, incredibly pleased with himself. Having fully reclaimed his status as the master of the house, Allie didn't try to make excuses or yell back. She spun around, nearly knocking over a chart rack, and walked quickly toward the locker room. She needed to hide, to lock herself away, just to stop hearing that laughter, which now seemed to be permanently stained into the very walls of the hospital. 3 hours earlier, when the night sky over the city was still thick and black, Ian had quietly closed the break room door. Allie was sleeping on the couch, covered by a blanket. He had looked at her peaceful face for a long time, feeling a deep, quiet gratitude toward this girl. He needed some fresh air. His head felt heavy from the sleepless night, the tension, and the whirlwind of emotions. Ian walked down the back stairs to the boiler room, grabbed his razor and brush, but didn't touch the old bag of clothes. He planned to come back in the afternoon when Allie woke up and calmly explain things. He couldn't live in this basement anymore. He needed to find a real job and rent at least a room. The May night breathed cool air. Ian walked over to the hospital fence and pulled out a cigarette, but didn't light it. From the road, cutting through the silence of the sleeping neighborhood, a heavy engine roared, moving slowly, braking for a red light. was a massive refrigerated semi-truck. The glow of a street lamp caught the white side of the trailer. Painted on it in huge, dark blue letters was Sterling Logistics. Next to it sat a stylized logo of a spread wing. Ian froze. The cigarette slipped from his fingers onto the wet asphalt. Slick from evening rain. The word Sterling echoed in his mind with a sudden flash of recognition. A bright, blinding white light exploded behind his eyes. He instinctively grabbed his head with both hands. The pain in his skull was unbearable. Crushing. Through the agony. Sounds and images began to break through, not foreign ones, but his own. A spacious lobby with marble floors. A woman's high-pitched voice. Cracking into a shriek. "You are nobody here. Ian, your father listens only to me." Then his father's face tired. Irritated. The sound of a shattering vase. And the woman screaming again, "Choose, it's him or me." Ian staggered. His back hitting the metal bars of the hospital fence. Memories rushed back in a chaotic, unstoppable flood. England. The strict lecture halls of Oxford. The smell of expensive leather chairs in the boardroom. His mother's funeral. A black umbrella. Rain. A clump of dirt hitting the coffin lid. And then. That night. The staircase. Eleanor standing at the top. Her face twisted in rage. A sharp argument right on the edge. A loss of balance. The fall. And then, heavy darkness. He tried to take a step. But his legs gave out. Nausea surged in his throat. Ian dropped to his knees right on the cold asphalt. Breathing heavily. Unable to stop the torrent of returning memories. The world around him began to fade. The last thing he heard before completely losing consciousness was the screeching of air brakes from the semi-truck stopping nearby. The truck driver, a heavy-set man in a greasy jacket, jumped out of the cab. He had only planned to pull over at a 24-hour kiosk for cigarettes. But he noticed the fallen man. Walking closer. The driver shined his phone's flashlight on the man's face. He cursed under his breath. He had been looking at this guy's face every single day for the past few months. It stared back at him from missing person flyers at the depot gate. From company-wide email blasts. There was a massive reward for information on the whereabouts of Alexander Sterling's only heir, a reward so big, the driver could buy 2 of these big rigs with it. With trembling fingers. He dialed the head of corporate security. "Hello. Steve, I found him." "Yeah. Right outside that private hospital on the edge of town. Send your guys, he's out cold." The driver didn't know that Steve had been on Eleanor's payroll for a long time. Because of that. The first person Steve called wasn't Alexander Sterling. But her. "Send your guys. He's out cold." A black, unmarked SUV arrived 15 minutes later. 2 large men in plain clothes quickly and silently loaded Ian into the back seat. They shoved a thick envelope of cash into the truck driver's hands and told him to forget everything he saw. The SUV dissolved into the pre-dawn fog. Taking Ian into a completely different life. Cutting him off from Allie. Waking up was a long, sticky process. Ian tried to open his eyes. But his eyelids felt like lead. The first thing he registered was the smell. No hospital dust. Dampness. Or bleach. It smelled of expensive antiseptic. Fresh linens. And subtle notes of lavender. He was lying on a wide, adjustable bed. An IV needle was taped into his left arm. The tube running up to a silent electronic pump. The room was small, but luxurious. Wood paneling on the walls. Jing. Warm lighting. Heavy blackout blinds over the window. It was a hospital room. But an elite, private one. He heard muffled voices outside the door. Ian struggled to turn his head. The door opened. And a woman walked in. It was Eleanor, his father's second wife. She was 45. But thanks to flawless plastic surgery, she looked much younger. Perfect blowout. A sharp cashmere pantsuit. An arrogant look in her dark eyes. She walked up to the bed, stopping at a safe distance. The heavy, suffocating scent of her perfume hung in the air. "You're awake. Wonderful." Her voice was flat, devoid of any genuine joy or relief. "The doctors say the crisis has passed." Where am I?" Ian's voice was hoarse. His mouth was completely dry. He tried to prop himself up on his elbows, but the weakness was so absolute that he immediately fell back against the pillows. His brain was working slowly. His thoughts were tangled in a thick, medicated fog. "You're in a safe place. A private rehab facility outside the city." Eleanor crossed her arms over her chest. "You had a severe psychotic break, Ian. After our fight on the stairs, you acted erratically. You ran away from home and lived like a vagrant. Your father nearly lost his mind. You know his heart is weak. He can't handle this kind of stress." Ian frowned. The memories of the fall were vivid. But whatever drugs they were dripping into his veins made him doubt his own mind. The hospital. Ali. He forced the name out, trying to grab onto the brightest memory of the past few months. The girl from the hospital. The nurse. "I need to call her." Eleanor's face twitched. But she quickly composed herself. She had a strict plan. When security told her where they found her stepson, she rushed to the clinic first, beating her husband to the punch. She paid off the guards and the chief doctor of this private rehab handsomely to build an impenetrable wall of isolation around Ian. She needed time to lay the groundwork and convince Alexander Sterling that his son was completely mentally incompetent. "Ali." Eleanor sighed sympathetically. But cold calculation flashed in her eyes. "Ian, I hate to upset you, but your memory is playing cruel tricks on you." She pulled up a chair and sat next to the bed, leaning in closer. "That girl. She just used you. As soon as she saw your expensive lighter and realized you came from money, she started digging. When she found the missing person reward poster, she immediately called our security team. She sold you out for the reward money. Ian. She's just a calculating gold digger." "No." He shook his head, feeling the room slowly start to spin. "That's a lie. She's not like that. Trust me." "My boy." Eleanor stood up, smoothing a perfect crease on her trousers. "I wired the money to her account myself. The guards said she literally threw your belongings in the trash the second the car pulled up for you. You need to rest. Your treatment will take a long time. The doctors say your memories are heavily distorted by the trauma. We won't allow anyone to see you until you are completely recovered." She walked out, quietly closing the heavy door behind her. The lock clicked. Ian was left alone. Drop by drop, the clear liquid from the IV seeped into his blood, bringing with it a heavy, viscous oblivion. He tried to fight it. He tried to remember the warmth of Ali's hands when she cut his hair in the boiler room, her sincere gaze in the break room. But the poison of doubt, planted by Eleanor, was already infecting his weakened mind. He closed his eyes, falling into a dark void. For Ali, that day became the longest of her life. She worked her shift on autopilot, mechanically administering injections and changing bandages. Her colleagues no longer laughed openly, but she could feel their prickly, condescending stares on her back. By evening, a heavy, stifling cloud cover settled over the city. Allie rode the bus home, staring out the window at the passing gray apartment blocks. Inside, she felt completely hollow. All her resentment had burned out during the day, leaving behind only a hollow, crushing exhaustion. She turned the key in the lock of her old, scuffed door. The cramped entryway smelled of fried onions and old medicine. Her mother, Tamara, stepped out of the kitchen. She was a 8-year-old woman, aged prematurely by backbreaking work at a garment factory. Her hair was sloppily pinned up, and a faded knit cardigan hung over her shoulders. Her mother's face, carved with deep wrinkles of permanent dissatisfaction, instantly hardened the second she saw her daughter. "You're back," Tamara said dryly, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Go wash your hands. The potatoes are getting cold." Allie silently kicked off her shoes. She didn't want to eat. She only wanted to lie down, close her eyes, and sleep, so she wouldn't have to think about this morning. "I'm not hungry, Mom. I'm going to lay down." Tamara stopped in the middle of the hallway. Her gaze slid over her daughter's pale face and slouched shoulders. Her maternal instinct told her something bad had happened. But instead of sympathy, her usual defense mechanism kicked in attack. With the sour face again, her mother's voice grew loud, filling the tiny apartment. "What is it this time? Did your homeless bum do something I told you? I told you not to get involved with a deadbeat." Allie squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her back against the front door. "Mom. Please. Don't. He's gone. He left." This news didn't calm Tamara, it only poured gas on the fire. The fear of poverty that had haunted the woman her entire life made her cruel. Left well. Thank God. Good riddance to bad rubbish. She waved her hand in irritation. "How many times have I told you? Do you want to repeat my mistakes? Love. Ali doesn't put food on the table. And it doesn't pay the electric bill. You need to find a reliable man with a steady income. And instead, you're always picking up literal street trash." Her mother kept talking, listing all her grievances against life. Allie wasn't listening anymore. She walked into her small bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the light. Only now, in the dark of her room, beneath the muffled sound of her mother's voice through the wall. Did Allie allow herself to cry? She wasn't crying over the missing Ian. She was crying over her own naivety. Over how brutally reality punishes those who believe in fairy tales. And she didn't yet know that this terrible day was only the beginning of her real trials. August was suffocating. The heat wave was unbearable. The scorching air outside the hospital entrance felt thick and stagnant. Allie was methodically pushing a heavy, wet mop across the gray linoleum near the treatment room. Her back ached, and her legs had swelled up halfway through the shift. The sharp smell of bleach, which she had long been used to, suddenly triggered a persistent, rising nausea in her throat. The damp fabric of her scrubs clung to her shoulder blades. The girl bent down to wring out the mop head into the metal bucket, and suddenly felt the floor slowly tilting out from under her. Allie felt sick. Her vision went black. She tried to grab the wooden mop handle with her sweaty fingers, but her grip released on its own. The hollow thud of her knees hitting the linoleum was the last thing she remembered before falling into a hot, sticky darkness she came to from the sharp, biting smell of ammonia. Allie gasped frantically, coughed, and opened her eyes. She was lying on an exam table covered with crinkly disposable paper. The small office smelled of medicine, dried herbs, and strong steeped tea. Sitting next to her on a stool was Dr. Elias Barnes, an elderly OB-GYN. And one of the few people in the hospital who always said hello to the nurses and orderlies. His face, deeply lined with age, showed calm, professional concern. Lie still. Lie still. My girl. He gently pressed her shoulder down with his broad, warm palm, keeping her from sitting up. Your blood pressure tanked. I poured you some sweet tea. Take small sips. Ali obediently took the mug with trembling hands. The hot liquid cleared her head a bit. Doctor. Banis. I'm sorry. I must have overheated. It's so stuffy in the hallway. I need to go. I still have 2 rooms left to mop. The doctor let out a heavy sigh. He took off his thick, horn-rimmed glasses, wiped them with the edge of his lab coat, and looked intently at Ali. It's not the heat. Ali. While you were out cold, I took the liberty of doing a quick exam. And we can run blood work fast in-house. I had the lab rush your basic panels. He paused, carefully choosing his words. Ali froze, gripping the mug tightly. A nasty chill slowly crept down her spine. You are 12 weeks along. Sweetheart. Doctor. Barnes said quietly. Ali stopped breathing. The tea in her mug shook violently and splashed onto her fingers. But she didn't even feel the burn. 12 weeks. 3 months ago. That May night after the gala. The break room. Ian's warm hands and his low, rough voice in the dark. That can't be true. She whispered with barely moving lips, staring at the wall in front of her. It can be. Ali. And it's quite far along. The timeline matches a perfectly normal pregnancy. But you absolutely must get registered for prenatal care and do a full screening. Your body is severely exhausted. Ali. You need proper nutrition and rest. Not lugging mop buckets around for 12 hours a day. The doctor walked over to the sink, washed his hands, and dried them thoroughly with a paper towel. I know you live alone with your mother. I've seen how Langley looks at you. How Brenda and the others whisper behind your back. You're in a tough spot. But remember this, my door is always open to you. If things get too hard, come to me. I won't let anyone hurt you. And I'll handle your prenatal care myself. Ali walked out of the office on wooden legs. A steady buzzing filled her head. She mechanically finished her shift, changed in the cramped locker room, and walked out into the scorching heat. The sun was setting, giving way to a heavy, dusty, urban evening. The entire bus ride home, she stared out the window, completely blind to the gray apartment buildings floating by. Inside her, a new life was growing. A life from a man who had walked out early one morning and never even looked back. She was terrified, but pushing through that primal fear. A completely foreign, aching sense of responsibility began to take root. She turned the key in the old door. The cramped apartment was filled with a thick cloud of smoke from burning oil. Tamara stood by the stove in a faded housecoat, flipping burger patties in an old cast-iron skillet. Her face was set in its usual expression of deep dissatisfaction with life. You're back. She tossed over her shoulder without turning around. Wash your hands. Time for dinner, pale as a ghost again. They squeeze the life out of you at that job and pay you pennies. Ali leaned her back against the doorframe. She knew she couldn't hide the truth any longer. Her belly would start showing soon. And her constant physical weakness and morning sickness were already giving her away. Mom. I need to tell you something. Tamara wiped her hands on the kitchen towel and turned around. Something in her daughter's tone put her on edge. Spit it out. But make it quick. My show starts in 5 minutes. Ali looked down at the scuffed linoleum, gathering her courage. I'm pregnant. 12 weeks. A heavy silence hung in the kitchen. The only sound was the loud hiss of hot oil in the pan. Tamara's face began to change slowly. First, it went completely white. Then broke out in uneven red splotches. Her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. In a burst of rage, she violently shoved an empty plate to the edge of the table, sending it crashing to the floor where it shattered into large pieces. A bastard. Her voice became loud, shrill, and nasty, filling the entire cramped apartment. From that bum, from that filthy street trash, you dragged in from the cold. Allie instinctively covered her stomach with both hands, taking a step backward into the hallway. Mom. Please. Don't say that. Stop it. Tamara took a step toward her daughter, crossing her arms over her chest. In her eyes were vicious tears of resentment for her own failed life, which she now saw repeating in her daughter's fate. I broke my back my whole life. Worked 3 jobs, scrubbed floors on my hands and knees so you could make something of yourself. And you decided to repeat my mistakes. Breed more poverty in this dump. The mother was breathing heavily, her chest heaving. Tomorrow morning, you are going to a clinic for an abortion. Or you get the hell out of my house. Who's going to want you with a bum's bastard dragging behind you? Go live with him on a subway grate. Allie didn't stay to listen to the rest. She spun around, ran into the bathroom, and slammed the flimsy door shut with all her might, throwing the metal deadbolt. Loud banging immediately started on the door, accompanied by her mother's endless screaming. The girl turned both faucet handles all the way open. Cold water hit the metal sink with a loud rush, drowning out the voice on the other side of the door. Allie slowly slid down the cold tile wall and sat on the edge of the old cast-iron bathtub. She didn't sob out loud, but heavy tears rolled down her face, falling onto her scrubs. She was only 21. She had no real money, no good job, and no support from her family. She placed both palms on her still flat stomach, beneath her fingers. Her own pulse beat steadily. It's okay, little one, Allie whispered, never taking her eyes off the running water. Her voice trembled, but a new, stubborn strength broke through. We'll survive. Your dad, he isn't bad. He was just lost. I won't let anyone hurt you. I won't give you to anyone. Do you hear me? We are going to live. The next morning, Tamara put on her Sunday best, a strict navy blue dress bought 5 years ago for rare special occasions. She carefully pinned up her hair, grabbed her old leather purse, and marched with determined steps not toward the market, but toward the elite hospital. She hadn't slept a wink. Dark visions of the future spun in her head, a crying infant, endless poverty, the sideways glances of the neighbors in their building. Tamara was absolutely certain she was acting out of the highest form of maternal love. She had to save her daughter from a fatal mistake, even if it meant taking extreme measures. Her daughter was young, stupid, living in a fantasy world, and didn't realize she was ruining her only life. At the hospital, she confidently walked right past the security desk. Her strict, put-together appearance didn't raise any suspicion, and she went straight up to the administration floor. She got lucky. In the spacious reception area outside Dr. Owen's office, Dr. Langley was standing there as well. They were quietly discussing the purchase of new equipment. Tamara knocked on the open door and stepped firmly into the office. Dr. Owens. Dr. Langley. Hello. I am Allison Nelson's mother. I need to speak with you. This is a matter of life and death for my daughter. The men exchanged glances. Owens frowned in annoyance, He hated having random people in the administrative wing. But a faint, intrigued smirk appeared on Langley's lips. He gestured for the woman to take a seat. "We're listening carefully. Ms. Nelson," he prompted as she sat on the very edge of the leather chair. She clenched her hands on her lap so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "I'll give it to you straight. My idiot daughter is pregnant by that homeless bum who was hanging around here all winter." Langley gave a short chuckle, leaning back in his chair. His suspicions were confirmed. Well. The classic ending to a workplace romance in a boiler room. "And how exactly can we assist you with this situation?" Tamara leaned forward, looking the men dead in the eye. "She's stubborn. She wants to keep it. But how is she going to raise a kid? We don't have a dime to our names. I'm on disability. She's going to ruin her entire life." "Dr. Langley, you're a powerful man. You're the boss here. Scare her." Owens choked on the mineral water he had just poured into his glass. "Excuse me. Ms. Nelson, how exactly are we supposed to scare her? We are a medical facility. Not a correctionnelle institution. You can make her realize how hard it's going to be for her," the mother continued passionately, ignoring the head doctor entirely. "Put her on the worst shifts. Send her to the biohazard wing. Give her all the dirty work. Write her up for every little mistake. Cut her bonuses. Let her feel what real misery is like. Exhaust her until the stupid ideas get knocked out of her head. She'll break. And she'll go get an abortion herself. Save my girl. I'm begging you." A long pause hung in the office. Owens hesitantly shifted his gaze to the surgeon. To him, this request sounded insane. He wanted nothing to do with an employee's dramatic family member. But Langley's face shifted subtly. A cold, calculating spark glinted in his light eyes. Allie Nelson had publicly humiliated him at the gala that spring. She had rejected his patronage for literal street trash. And now, her own mother had just handed him the perfect legal instrument for revenge. On a silver platter. "Ms. Nelson." The surgeon's voice sounded soft, almost velvety. He leaned forward, lowering his tone confidentially. "We understand you perfectly. As doctors, we see these ruined women's lives every single day. And as management, we must, of course, care for the futures of our young staff. We will reorganize Allie's workflow so she fully comprehends the gravity of her situation." Tamara letut, à l'eau d'exhale. The harsh lines on her face relaxed. She stood up and gave an awkward nod to both doctors. "Thank you. I will never forget this. You are saints." She walked out of the office, carefully closing the heavy door behind her. Walking down the long, brightly lit hospital corridor, Tamara adjusted her purse strap on her shoulder. There was not a single drop of remorse inside her. "It's fine," she muttered quietly to herself, looking at her reflection in the hospital window glass. "She'll cry now, but she'll thank me later. I'm her mother. I've lived a full life. I know what's best for her." The next day marked the beginning of a literal workplace hell for Allie. Everything changed incredibly fast. In the morning, the head nurse, avoiding eye contact and refusing to explain, handed her a new schedule. Instead of her usual day shifts in the surgical wing, Allie was moved to a mixed schedule dominated by night shifts. She was assigned to the heaviest wing of the inpatient ward, the floor where bedridden patients required constant, back-breaking physical care. Langley stopped pretending she didn't exist. He started showing up in the ward exactly when Allie was completely drained of strength. On one particularly stifling evening, she was dragging a heavy overflowing laundry cart down the long hallway. Her back throbbed. And a dull, aching pain pulled at her lower abdomen. Langley walked toward her in a flawless dark suit. A pristine white lab coat draped over his shoulders. As he passed her, he stopped. "Keep working, Nelson." His voice was dry and intentionally loud. "The patient in room 3 has an overflowing bedpan. Why hasn't it been emptied yet? Did you decide your delicate condition exempts you from your direct duties? Go clean it. And I want the sinks in the treatment room shining. I'll check personally in 10 minutes." He walked past her, leaving a trail of expensive cologne. Allie gritted her teeth so hard her jaw ached. She pushed a loose strand of hair out of her face with a damp hand and silently went to carry out the order. But the physical exhaustion was only half the problem. Far worse was the complete social isolation. The rumor that Allie was pregnant by the missing homeless guy spread through the hospital like wildfire. The main loudspeaker, as always, was Brenda. During her lunch break, Allie went down to the hospital cafeteria. The sharp smell of meatloaf made her nauseous again. But she knew she had to eat for the baby. She grabbed a plastic tray with a bowl of thin soup and some juice, and walked over to a long table where Brenda was sitting with 3 nurses from internal medicine. The second Allie set her tray down and tried to pull out a chair, the conversation abruptly stopped. Brenda exchanged a meaningful look with the woman next to her. She dramatically, with a loud, grating screech, pushed her plate to the very edge of the table. "Girls, don't you think it suddenly got really stuffy in here?" Brenda said loudly, looking right over Allie's head. "There's a very specific smell. Like a dumpster. Or maybe a subway grate. You'd think this was a respectable medical facility. But it stinks like a homeless shelter. Let's move to another table before we catch something." The custodian stood up heavily. The other nurses, hiding awkward smirks, silently picked up their trays and moved to the next table, leaving Allie completely alone. The cafeteria hummed with its usual noise. Aluminum spoons clinked against bowls. But around Allie, en invisible, dense wall of vacuum had formed. Dozens of eyes side-eyed her with morbid curiosity. Allie's breath caught. A hot, hard lump rose in her throat, making it hard to breathe. She wanted to jump up, flip the stupid tray, scream at them, run to the locker room, and bawl her eyes out from the injustice of it all. But she remembered the cold tile of her bathroom and the promise she had made to herself and her unborn child. Allie slowly picked up her spoon. Her hand trembled slightly, but she forced herself to scoop up the lukewarm soup. She ate mechanically, tasting absolutely nothing, staring straight ahead. She swallowed the food along with her unshed tears and humiliation because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. And she needed physical strength to survive in this cold, hostile world. December hit the city all at once, without warning or gradual frosts. In the morning, a biting, piercing wind swept through the streets. And by evening, the roads were locked under a thick layer of dirty gray ice. For Allie, the cold became a constant companion. It slipped under her thin autumn jacket at the bus stop and settled deep inside her bones in the echoing, indifferent hospital corridors. She was in her 7th month of pregnancy. Her belly had grown large and heavy. It pulled at her lower back with a constant, dull ache. Her old work shoes, bought long before the pregnancy, now ruthlessly squeezed her swollen feet by mid-shift. Every step on the hard linoleum sent a shock of tension up her calves. Allie moved slowly, carefully shifting her weight, supporting her back with one hand. That Tuesday, she barely made it to her short 30-minute break. The girls stood up heavily from the nurse's station, She just needed to make it to Dr. Barnes' office. Sit for 5 minutes in silence. Drink some warm water. And check her blood pressure. Anaste. Steady ringing had been in her ears since morning. And dark spots occasionally swam before her eyes from lack of sleep. She slowly walked up to the familiar white door at the end of the hallway and pulled the handle out of habit. Locked. Ali frowned in confusion. She checked her watch. Visiting hours weren't over. Dr. Barnes had more than an hour left on his shift. From the adjacent treatment room, clinking glass ampoules, walked Katie, a young day shift nurse. She was one of the few who hadn't turned her back on Ali. Seeing Ali at the locked door, Katie stopped abruptly. The girl guiltily looked around to make sure no one was nearby. And stepped close. Don't knock. Ali. Katie said quietly, looking down at her metal tray. Her voice sounded strained. He's not here. And he won't be back for a while. What do you mean? Ali leaned her shoulder against the cool wall, feeling her legs grow weak. Is he on vacation? He didn't mention anything last week. Katie shook her head. Her face reflected a mix of genuine fear and pity. He's in cardiology. At the county hospital. Last night, after his shift, Langley dragged him into Owen's office. Because of you. By the way, the orderlies on the floor heard them screaming in there. Langley demanded Dr. Barnes stop covering for you. Stop writing you medical exemptions from heavy lifting. And stop protecting you from the board. He screamed that the old man was losing his mind for dealing with you. And threatened to fire him for cause for falsifying medical records. Ali stopped breathing. The baby inside her kicked restlessly, reacting to the sudden spasm of her muscles. Dr. Barnes tried to stand up for you. Katie continued, almost whispering, crumpling a paper napkin in her pocket. He said they were butchers, not doctors. Putting a pregnant girl on night shifts and making her carry full bedpans. He argued that it was grounds for a lawsuit. And then, right there in Owen's office, he clutched his chest, turned pale, and collapsed into a chair. They had to call a code. It was a massive heart attack. Ali. They took him away in critical condition. The nurse quickly walked further down the hallway, her heels clicking rapidly, leaving Ali completely alone. The girl stood unblinking, staring at the closed white door of the office. The only person who had protected her inside these walls was lying in an ICU right now because of her. Her protection was gone. The illusion that she would be able to quietly work until her legal maternity leave collapsed in 1 second. She was left entirely alone against hospital management and a bitter, hateful staff. Her legs trembled violently, from exhaustion and fear. Ali slowly walked to the break room. She needed to drink at least a sip of water to stop her hands from shaking and just sit down. She pushed the door open. The small room was overheated, smelling of strong instant coffee, fresh pastries from the cafeteria, and women's perfume. At the table sat Brenda in the company of 2 older custodians from surgery. They were loudly discussing their upcoming holiday bonuses. The moment Ali appeared, the conversation died instantly. The women turned their heads in sync. Their gazes were prickly, heavy, and calculating. Ali silently walked to the water cooler, grabbed a disposable cup, and pressed the lever. She tried not to look in their direction, dreaming of only one thing: sitting on the edge of the vinyl couch and giving her aching back just 5 minutes of rest. Brenda loudly pushed back her chair and stood up heavily. She walked over to the large window. Outside, the December wind was howling, forcefully hurling fine, icy sleet against the glass. The custodian sharply With effort, turned the plastic handle and threw the wide winter window wide open. A blast of freezing, blistering air instantly rushed into the overheated break room. The stream of icy wind hit Allie in the face, blowing a strand of hair off her forehead. "Girls, it's impossible to breathe in here," Brenda declared loudly with a theatrical sigh, looking right over Allie's head. "We need to air this place out big time. It smells like a dumpster in here. Or an unwashed body. Or maybe a subway grate. Next thing you know, we'll catch some disease. We don't need unsanitary conditions in our department." The other two custodians nodded in agreement, hiding malicious, satisfied smiles behind their mugs of tea. The freezing wind quickly chilled the room. Allie stood by the cooler. She was wearing a thin scrub jacket made of cheap cotton. The cold immediately pierced through her clothes. Goosebumps covered her skin, the fingers holding the cup went numb. She looked at Brenda. The woman stood by the open window, arms crossed over her chest, showing with her entire demeanor that she would not close the latch until Allie got out. It was an open, theatrical torture by cold. A hard lump formed in Allie's throat. She didn't argue. She didn't have the strength for pointless fights. She had no energy to prove her right to be in this room. The girl slowly placed the untouched cup of water on the nightstand, turned around, and walked back out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her, forever cutting off her path to warmth. She returned home late that evening, drained to her absolute limit. Her back hurt so badly that every movement required immense effort. The cramped entryway smelled of fried potatoes and burnt onions. Tamara stepped out of the kitchen, hastily wiping her hands on a less than clean dish towel. Her behavior seemed strange to Allie. Usually, her mother met her with the usual nagging or silent displeasure. But today, a fussy, nervous expression was frozen on her face. She avoided eye contact. "You're back." Her mother looked away, adjusting the edge of the towel. "Go wash your hands. I put the kettle on." Allie nodded, silently. She took off her boots and sank heavily onto a kitchen stool, stretching out her aching, swollen legs. The baby tossed restlessly inside her, causing discomfort. Tamara placed a mug of sweet tea in front of her. And suddenly, as if by accident, placed 2 printed sheets of paper and a ballpoint pen on the faded vinyl tablecloth. "Here. Sign this. Right at the bottom." Her mother tapped a thin finger on the bottom line of the second page. Allie struggled to focus her gaze on the papers. The letters swam before her eyes. Blood pounded in her temples from exhaustion. "What is this?" "Mom, it's for the welfare office." Tamara answered quickly, almost rushing her words. She stepped back to the sink and started loudly scrubbing a plate, turning her back to the dark window. "For your maternity payout and WIC benefits. I stood in line at the state offices for half the day today. I filled everything out myself. Gathered all the paperwork. You just need to sign it. And I'll drop it off tomorrow. You see for yourself. You're due soon. And we don't have a spare dime. Come on. Sign it before I forget." Allie's mind was clouded by physical exhaustion. The thought that her mother had shown real care for the first time in ages standing in lines for her unborn child's future dulled any vigilance. The girl picked up the pen and, without reading the fine print at the top of the page, mechanically scribbled her sweeping signature right where her mother pointed. "Thanks, Mom," Allie said quietly, pushing the papers away. "I'm going to sleep. I have zero energy left." She didn't see how Tamara instantly swiped the papers off the table, carefully folded them in half, and hid them deep in the pocket of her housecoat. The woman's face was pale. her lips pressed tightly into a thin line. She was absolutely certain she was saving her daughter from eternal shame and an unbearable burden. Even if she had to commit a final, unforgivable betrayal to do it. The next morning, barely after Allie crossed the threshold of the department and tried to open her locker in the changing room, the head nurse approached her. Her face was completely unreadable. Her voice dry. "Nelson. Doctor. Owens wants to see you. Immediately." Allie left her bag on the bench and headed to the administrator's office. Inside, it was quiet. Dr. Samuel Owens sat behind his massive oak desk, neatly organizing folders. By the large window, with his hands in the pockets of perfectly creased trousers, stood Dr. Victor Langley. "You wanted to see me, Dr. Owens." Allie stopped at the threshold. Owens looked up. He didn't offer her a seat. Picking up a piece of paper from the desk, he slid it to the very edge of the table, with 2 fingers. "Yes. Nelson. I called you in. I've signed off on your letter. You can go to HR to collect your final paycheck and your separation paperwork." Allie blinked in confusion. Her tired brain refused to immediately process the meaning of those words. "What letter? I didn't write anything." Langley slowly stepped away from the window and approached the desk. A thin, triumphant, icy smile played on his lips. He had finally gotten what he had been pushing for all these months. "Your letter of voluntary resignation, Ali," the surgeon said with mock, sadistic sympathy. "We completely understand. You're in a difficult situation. The work is physically demanding, and you just can't handle it. You made a very wise, adult decision. The hospital is happy to accommodate you. We are waiving the standard 2-week notice period. You are free to go. Effective today." "I didn't write anything." Allie took a step toward the desk, feeling the floor drop out from under her. She looked at the piece of paper. The top half was filled out in the neat, painfully familiar handwriting of her mother. "I hereby request to resign from my position voluntarily." And at the very bottom was her own signature from last night. The exact one she had signed in the kitchen. A heavy, thick silence hung in the office. The puzzle pieces in Allie's head clicked together. Welfare. Financial aid. Her mother's fussiness and avoiding eye contact. Her own mother had personally handed her over to be torn apart by these people. This is a fraud. Allie's voice trembled. "I signed a blank form. I was told it was for state benefits. You have no right. I'm in my 7th month. You cannot legally fire me." Owen sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. He spoke in a boring, bureaucratic tone that left no chance for dialogue or justice. "Nelson. Let's skip the hysterics. We're not at a flea market. The letter is in your hand. Well, your signature is on it. My approval is on it. Everything is strictly according to labor laws. If you want, go to the Department of Labor. Hire lawyers. Try to prove the form was blank. But we both know you have neither the time nor the money for lawsuits." Langley stepped very close. He looked down at her large belly, hidden beneath her old scrubs. Then raised his gaze to her pale face, twisted in absolute despair. "Pack your things and get out." "Nelson," he said, clipping every word. His voice sounded dry and ruthless. "I want your locker empty in 20 minutes. And I never want to see you on the premises of my hospital ever again." Allie walked out of the office on stiff legs. "Adul." Muffled static roared in her ears. She mechanically walked to the locker room, took off her mended white jacket, hung it neatly on a hook, and pulled an old plastic grocery bag from her metal locker. She put her work shoes in it, her mug with the chipped handle, and a few personal items. In Haya, they silently, without looking her in the eye, handed her her separation papers and a meager final check for her days worked. She walked outside. The December frost burned her face unpleasantly. The wind swept prickly ice dust across the gray asphalt. The sky was low, leaden, and oppressive. Allie walked slowly down the cleared path toward the hospital gates. The money she was given was catastrophically little. Ahead lay complete uncertainty, unemployment, and zero benefits. She needed to stop by a store just to buy some food. She walked into a cheap convenience store right by the bus stop. She bought a box of the cheapest pasta and 3 red apples. She couldn't afford anything else. She stepped back out into the freezing street. The old plastic bag quickly became stiff and brittle in the severe cold. Allie walked toward the bus stop, supporting her heavy belly with her free hand, trying not to slip on the black ice. Suddenly, there was a sharp, dry crack. The seam on the old plastic bag couldn't handle the weight and the freezing temperatures, and split open down its entire length. The box of pasta hit the packed snow with a dull thud. The 3 red apples tumbled out onto the icy sidewalk, rolling in different directions, standing out in stark, bright contrast against the gray winter sludge. A deep, heavy despair washed over her. She tried to squat down to pick up her food. She carefully bent her knees, but her large, firm belly pressed against her thighs, preventing her from leaning down any further. The girl lost her balance, bracing herself on the icy asphalt with her bare hand, painfully scraping the skin on her palm. Her fingers instantly froze. She tried to reach at least one piece of fruit. From behind her, she heard the steady crunch of footsteps on the snow. Walking toward the staff parking lot, where a black luxury SUV sat, was Dr. Victor Langley. He was wearing his long cashmere coat, a warm wool scarf tied around his neck. He saw Allie. He saw her torn bag, and the cheap groceries scattered across the snow. He saw her, heavily pregnant, clumsily trying to reach for food with freezing red hands. Langley didn't slow down. He walked closer. An apple had rolled almost right up to his polished winter boot. The surgeon stopped. He looked down at Allie. In his eyes, there was not a single drop of pity, not a shadow of sympathy. Only the cold, absolute superiority of a man who had finally crushed the one who dared challenge him. He kicked the apple away with his boot in disgust, sending it into a pile of dirty snow. "Watch where you drop your trash. Pathetic," Langley tossed out in a flat, indifferent voice. He stepped right over the scattered pasta, walked up to his car, got into the warm leather interior, and slammed the heavy door shut. The engine roared to life powerfully and smoothly. The SUV pulled away effortlessly, leaving Allie behind. The girl didn't try to get up anymore. She dropped to her knees, right in the dirty, icy snow. The wind whipped her hair, burning her tear-streaked face. Allie wrapped both arms around her belly, as if trying to shield her unborn child from this cruel, freezing world where there was no place left for them. She didn't scream. She cried silently. Hot tears rolled down her frozen cheeks, leaving wet trails on her skin. It was a point of absolute powerlessness. They had taken everything from her, her job, her pride, her only protector. Her own mother had betrayed her. Sitting in the snow next to her spilled food, Allie stared blankly ahead, feeling the cold slowly seep into her very heart. January was bleak and dark. The days dragged on agonizingly, blending into one endless gray blur. A heavy, oppressive silence hung over the cramped apartment. Tamara sat in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. From the cracked door of the adjacent room came her daughter's uneven, jagged breathing. Allie lay on the sofa, facing the wall. She almost never got up. The 8th month of pregnancy drained her last physical reserves, and her moral strength was entirely gone. The girl was fading away before her eyes. Deep, dark circles lay under her eyes. Her sharpened cheekbones made her face look foreign and emaciated. Tamara stared at the peeling paint on the windowsill, and a sharp sense of her own guilt pressed down so hard it became difficult to breathe. She herself, with her own 2 hands, had destroyed her only child's life. She wanted to save her from poverty, but ended up throwing her into the worst kind of hell. And now, watching her daughter simply wait for the end, Tamara realized she had no right to sit idly by. The woman stood up heavily from the stool and walked out into the hallway. She needed to occupy her hands with something, just to keep from going crazy with her own thoughts. She opened the old hallway closet and started sorting through the winter clothes. Shoved onto the bottom shelf was a thick plastic bag. Inside were the clothes of that homeless man. Allie had washed them back in the spring, neatly stitched up the tears, folded them, and never brought herself to throw them away. Tamara pulled at the jacket. The fabric caught on the edge of the shelf, and the jacket tumbled to the floor. From the deep inner pocket, a heavy object fell out with a dull metal clank. The woman bent down. Lying on the scuffed linoleum was a massive lighter made of dark metal. Tamara picked it up, turning it over in her hands. On the matte surface, neatly engraved initials stood out clearly, I.S. At that exact moment, the old television in Allie's room muttered quietly. Her daughter kept it on just for background noise, so she wouldn't be left in absolute silence. The national news broadcast was on. The anchor's voice sounded even and official. After a prolonged absence due to a severe illness, the sole heir of Alexander Sterling, Ian Sterling, has returned to the helm of the transportation empire. A reminder that in recent months, the corporation was rocked by internal conflicts. However, the young executive has already enacted drastic management shakeups. Tamara took a few hesitant steps toward the bedroom door. The screen showed footage from a press conference. In the center of the room, sitting behind a long table, was a man in a sharp, navy blue suit. His face was hard, his gaze direct and confident. His hair was cropped short. His smooth, clean-shaven jaw revealed a strong, unbreakable nature. Tamara stopped breathing. Her fingers gripped the lighter so tightly that the cold metal painfully bit into her palms. It was him. That exact homeless bum from the boiler room. The one she had so fiercely chased out of her house, calling him a deadbeat. The initials on the lighter perfectly matched the name on the television screen. She slowly sank to a squat right there in the hallway. The realization of the sheer scale of her mistake washed over her like a tidal wave. If this man was the heir to a billion-dollar fortune, it meant that all these months Allie hadn't been suffering because of a generic betrayal by a street vagrant. Something terrible had happened. Something they didn't understand. And the key to saving her daughter was currently sitting on the screen of that old television. Tamara stood up, her face set in determination. She walked into her bedroom, pulled a tin can out from under her mattress where she kept her rainy day cash, and counted the bills. It was only enough for a one-way ticket in coach. She got dressed quickly, trying not to make noise, and wrote a short note. Left on business for 2 days. Food is in the fridge. Hold on, baby. She placed the paper on the kitchen table, threw on her old winter coat, and stepped out into the freezing January evening. The trip to the city completely exhausted her. Drafts howled through the coach train car. Her back ached unbearably. But Tamara never closed her eyes. Once she reached the station, she spent her last pennies on a shuttle bus, asking locals how to get to the elite suburban enclave, where the wealthiest people in the state lived. She reached the high wrought iron gates of the Sterling estate only by evening. The wind picked up, throwing dry, stinging snow in her face. Tamara, rubbing her freezing cheeks, walked up to the security booth. Two large men in black uniforms stepped out to meet her, blocking the path. Private property. Who are you looking for? Ma'am, one of them asked dryly, looking her cheap coat up and down. I need Ian. Ian Sterling. Tamara's voice shook from cold and exhaustion. But she stubbornly held her ground. Tell him I'm here. It is a matter of life and death. The guard smirked. We get people like you with important matters every day. Walk away nicely. Lady. Mr. Sterling isn't taking visitors. I'm not leaving. Tamara took a step forward, trying to squeeze past the men. Let me through. I need to tell him. He has to know. The guard blocked her path. Tamara slipped on the icy paving stones and fell to her knees. Snow instantly packed under the hem of her coat, burning her skin. At that moment, the heavy metal gates slowly began to slide open. A black, executive Maybach smoothly rolled out of the estate driveway. The car moved slowly. Its wide tires crunched softly against the packed snow. In the back seat sat Ian. The last few weeks had been a living hell for him. After breaking out of the private rehab where Eleanor had deceptively locked him away, his first priority was getting to his father. The doctors hired by his stepmother had pumped him full of drugs to suppress his will and distort his memory for a long time. But his mind fought back. Once recovered, Ian threw Eleanor out of the house without a dime and took control of the business into his own hands. He had money, power, and influence. He was missing only one thing, the name of that girl from the hospital. His memory gave up facts reluctantly. He remembered the warmth of her hands. He remembered how she cut his hair. He remembered the smell of heated dust in the boiler room. But the second he tried to remember her last name or the name of the hospital, a blank, impenetrable wall went up in his head. The Maybach braked at the exit, letting a snowplow pass. Tamara saw a silhouette behind the tinted window. She realized this was her only chance. There wouldn't be a second one. Forgetting the pain in her bruised knees, the woman lunged forward, dodging the confused security guard. She threw herself right at the car and pressed a small color photograph against the cold glass. It was a picture of Allie, taken at her nursing school graduation. I'm Allison Nelson's mother. Tamara screamed so loudly, her voice cracked. Look here. This is Allie. Ian whipped his head around. Through the tinted glass, he saw the face of the girl in the picture. In that exact second, the fog in his mind instantly evaporated. Allie Nelson. Nurse. The hospital on the edge of town. The details snapped together into one sharp, agonizing picture. He lunged forward. Stop, open the doors. Ian jumped out of the warm cabin into the freezing cold. He was wearing a light cashmere overcoat, but he didn't feel the chill at all. The guards immediately took a step back, realizing their mistake. He walked up to Tamara. The woman stood before him, breathing heavily. Her face was covered in red splotches from the frost and tears. You are her mother. Ian's voice was deep, barely contained tension, boiled beneath it. Where is she? What happened to her? Tamara couldn't hold it in. She dropped to her knees right in the snowbank in front of him. She cried silently, covering her face with her hands. Forgive me, she said through her tears. Forgive me. For the love of God. I ruined everything. I went to Langley myself. I begged them to squeeze Allie so she would give up the baby. I thought I was saving her from living paycheck to paycheck. But with my own hands, I threw her to the wolves. Ian froze. The puzzle was finally complete. Allie didn't betray him. Like Eleanor had drilled into his head. She was simply left alone. And then finished off by the people who were supposed to protect her. Get up. Ian grabbed Tamara by the elbows and jerked her to her feet. His grip was harsh but controlled. Tell me everything. Fast? She's pregnant. Ian. Tamara looked up at him with bloodshot, wet eyes. 8th month. She's carrying your child. And we tormented her. They fired her from the hospital. Threw her out on the street without a penny. I was the one who slipped her the resignation letter. She's at home right now. She's fading away from grief. Ian. Save her. Ian's face instantly turned ash gray. Pregnant. Thrown out on the street. Tormented. He pressed his lips tightly together. He let go of Tamara and turned to his head of security, who was already standing by his side. Get a car for this woman. Take her to the best hotel in the city. Get her Phil. And let her rest. And I need the legal team. Everyone on the clock. Right now. The next morning, Allie forced herself to get up off the couch. She needed to get a copy of her medical records. Without that document, she couldn't register at the free public women's clinic. And time was relentlessly ticking closer to her due date. She put on her old winter coat. It hadn't zipped over her large belly for a long time. So she had to awkwardly tie it closed with a wide wool scarf. Allie walked down the street very slowly. Every step on the icy sidewalk shot a pulling pain up her lower back. The hospital lobby was warm, smelling familiarly of bleach and fresh coffee from the vending machine. Allie walked up to the reception window. The nurse behind the glass, seeing her, looked away and snapped dryly. Wait. They're looking for your file. Medical records is closed right now. Allie leaned her back against the cool wall, breathing heavily and supporting her belly with her hand. Out of the hallway leading to the surgical wing walked Brenda. The custodian was pushing a cart with mop buckets. Seeing Allie, she stopped. Unexpectant. Vicious smirk instantly appeared on her puffy face. Oh. Girls. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Brenda announced loudly to the entire lobby, addressing the young nurses standing by the water cooler. Well? If it isn't Nelson. What? Come begging for charity. Or is your homeless boyfriend dodging child support from his subway grate? The nurses whispered among themselves, hiding their eyes. Allie looked down at her worn-out winter boots. She didn't have the strength to reply. A hard, scratching lump sat in her throat. She just wanted to get her paperwork and leave this place forever. From the staircase, Dr. Victor Langley slowly descended. He was wearing perfectly pressed scrubs and a pristine white lab coat. He stopped nearby, crossed his arms over his chest, and with obvious pleasure, took in the pathetic sight of his former subordinate, Nelson. His voice cut through the hum of the lobby, forcing everyone to go silent. Why are you here? You were clearly told you are not to step foot on hospital property. Your appearance is scaring away our paying patients. Take your little papers and get out on the street. Allie raised a deadened gaze to him. In her eyes, there was no fear. No anger, only the infinite exhaustion of a person who had been entirely broken. Suddenly, a sharp, piercing screech of brakes echoed from the street outside. The sound was so loud that Langley flinched and turned his head. The heavy glass doors of the hospital flew open with such force that they slammed against their stoppers with a loud crash. Freezing air rushed into the heated lobby. Ian walked in. He was wearing an unbuttoned, long cashmere overcoat, revealing a perfectly tailored business suit underneath. Behind him walked 4 men in identical dark suits, his personal security detail, and senior corporate attorneys clutching leather briefcases. The lobby instantly plunged into absolute, dead silence. The only sound was the heavy, confident click of expensive shoes against the tile floor. Brenda's mouth fell open, and she dropped her rag right onto the clean floor. Langley slowly lowered his arms. He recognized this man. It was the same stray from the gala back in the spring. But the man walking toward him now was no street vagrant. Every movement this guest made radiated so much power and quiet strength that the surgeon instinctively wanted to take a step back. Ian paid absolutely no attention to the paralyzed hospital staff. He walked straight up to Ali, smoothly, without caring about his expensive trousers or the dirt on the hospital tile. He dropped to both knees in front of her. A collective, stifled gasp swept through the lobby from dozens of witnesses. The young man carefully, as if she were made of the thinnest glass, took her red, freezing hands in his palms. Then he bowed his head and pressed his lips against her large belly, hidden beneath layers of old, faded clothing. "Forgive me." His voice sounded muffled. But in that ringing silence, every word dropped heavy and clear. He lifted his head and looked straight into Ali's eyes. In his dark gaze was unbearable pain and tenderness. "I was in hell, Ali. My mind was held hostage. But I remembered. I came back to you. I will never leave you again." A large tear rolled down the girl's pale cheek. She weakly squeezed his fingers, unable to utter a single word, simply not believing that this nightmare was finally over. Ian slowly stood up. He carefully moved Ali behind his back, exactly as he had done that spring at the restaurant. His face instantly transformed. The tenderness vanished without a trace, replaced by cold, ruthless fury. Sterling took a step toward Langley, from an office on the first floor. Drawn by the commotion, rushed Dr. Owens, the administrator. Seeing the imposing delegation and the massive security guys, he immediately realized something catastrophic had happened. "What is going on here?" Owens tried to intervene, forcing a strained, default smile onto his face. "Who are you, people?" One of the lawyers silently pulled a thick folder of documents from his briefcase and handed it to the head doctor. Langley turned white. All his former arrogance evaporated, leaving behind only raw fear of a man who was clearly more powerful and infinitely more dangerous. "You seem to have forgotten who the primary sponsor and co-owner of this medical building is." Ian's voice was even without yelling, but the tone sent shivers down the nurses' spines. "Effective this minute. The Sterling Charitable Foundation is terminating all contracts with you. The paperwork for the hostile takeover of this facility's shares has already been filed with arbitration." Owens frantically skimmed the papers, breaking out in a cold sweat. "Mr. Sterling, please listen." Langley made a pathetic attempt to save face. His voice trembled, betraying his panic. "There's been a terrible mistake. We didn't know. We treated you. We took you in last winter." The businessman looked at the surgeon with icy disgust. "You tormented the woman carrying my child," Sterling said, biting off every single word. "You bullied her. You forced her to do hazardous work. You deceptively threw a pregnant employee out into the freezing cold." A heavy pause hung in the air. The lobby was so quiet, you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. "Tomorrow, the district attorney's office. financial auditors, and a special commission from the State Medical Board are walking into this hospital. Ian continued, never raising his voice. I will personally ensure that every single one of your abuses, every illegal order regarding the termination of a pregnant employee, becomes a criminal indictment. You will never wear a white coat again. I will strip you of your medical license. And you, Owens. That applies to you, in equal measure. The head doctor collapsed heavily into a chair near reception. Clutching his chest, Langley just stood there, his arms hanging limp. He was destroyed socially, professionally, and irrevocably. Ian shifted his gaze to Brenda. The custodian. The woman pressed herself against the wall, trying to become invisible. Security. Escort this woman out the door, he ordered. She no longer works here. Brenda swallowed hard. Abandoned her mop bucket right in the middle of the hallway. And without saying a word, hurriedly walked toward the staff exit. Escorted by the sharp gazes of the security team. Having dealt with them, Sterling turned back to Allie. All the harshness drained from his face. He took off his warm cashmere overcoat and gently wrapped it around the girl's thin shoulders, covering her old winter coat. Let's go home, he said quietly, carefully putting an arm around her. They walked out of the lobby. Security held the doors open for them, pushing back the paralyzed hospital staff. Allie walked, leaning on Ian. She felt the warmth of his arm. And for the first time in long, terrifying months, she realized she no longer had to defend herself, and just survive. Justice had finally been served for everyone to see. The drive to the old apartment took less than an hour. But to Allie, it felt like an eternity. She sat in the passenger seat of the warm, Silon car, watching the snow-covered streets drift by. Left behind was a literal hell, humiliation, and primal fear for her future. Right now, Ian was driving smoothly, never taking his eyes off the road. Only occasionally did his right hand rest on hers, passing on a calm, confident strength. They were going to pack her things. Allie didn't want to return to the cramped apartment. But her mother was still there. The woman whose actions had nearly destroyed her life. But who then, stepping over her own pride, had traveled to the city to seek the truth? Ian parked the car near the peeling entrance of her building. He cut the engine and turned to Allie. I'll come up with you, if you tell me to. I'll wait in the stairwell, if you want to leave right away. Without talking, we'll just turn around. It's your call. Allie nodded slowly. It was hard for her to cross that threshold. But she knew she couldn't run from the past anymore. She unlocked the door with her key. The entryway smelled of valerian drops and burnt cooking oil. A smell she had been used to since childhood. But right now, it felt foreign. Tamara sat on a stool in the kitchen, her head bowed low, hearing the click of the lock. She stood up heavily and walked out into the hallway. The woman looked as if she had aged 10 years in just a few weeks. Shoulders slumped, deep lines framing her mouth, hair hastily pinned back. Seeing her daughter, and behind her, the tall, commanding figure of Ian. She froze. Her lips trembled. Tamara took an unsteady step forward and suddenly began to slowly sink toward the scuffed linoleum, trying to drop to her knees. Mom. Don't. Allie rushed to her despite her heavy belly, catching her by the elbows. Ian was instantly by her side, supporting the woman and helping her stand. Tamara couldn't look at them. She covered her face with her dry, cracked hands, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Forgive me, baby girl. Her voice broke, turning into a hoarse whisper. For the love of God. Forgive me. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't breathe. Once I realized what I had done, I cursed my own life. Ali sat her mother back down on the stool, then crouched next to her, taking her cold hands in her own. Why did you do it? Mom, the girl asked quietly. There was no anger in her voice. Only infinite exhaustion. Why did you slip me those papers? Why did you go to Langley? Tamara looked at her daughter with exhausted eyes. That gaze held all the pain of a person who had gotten hopelessly tangled in their own fears. I was terrified. Ali. Scared to death. I remember my own life, how I was left alone with you in my arms. Counting pennies. Scrubbing floors at night, just to buy you an extra apple. I looked at your Ian. A vagabond. No ID. No home. I thought. That's it. My girl is doomed. She's going to repeat my life. Rot away in poverty. I wanted to save you. I thought if they squeezed you at work, if it got too hard, you'd come to your senses. But look what happened. I didn't know they were monsters. I didn't know they would do that to you. The woman shifted her gaze to Ian. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest, listening intently. Thank you, Ian. Tamara lowered her head. For not chasing me away from your gates. For listening. For taking my daughter back alive. I can die in peace now. It's too early for you to die. Tamara. Ian's voice was even, stripped of any previous hostility. He walked into the kitchen and leaned his hands against the edge of the table. Ali forgave you. And I forgive you. You made a terrible mistake. But you went out and fixed it yourself. That takes courage. Ian pulled a thick white envelope from the inner pocket of his coat and placed it on the faded vinyl tablecloth. Tomorrow morning. A car will pick you up. I've arranged for a 2-month stay for you at a specialized cardiac retreat in California. You need to treat your heart and restore your nerves. They have excellent doctors there. And when you get back, we'll sort out your living situation. Tamara stared at the envelope, too afraid to touch it. She looked back at her daughter. Ali smiled softly and squeezed her mother's fingers. Go. Mom. You need to rest. We'll be waiting for you to come back. In that moment, the heavy tension that had hung in the air of the cramped kitchen for years finally vanished. Old grievances, fears, and resentments dissolved, giving way to a difficult but long-awaited peace. February claimed the city as its rightful owner. The streets were buried in snow. But inside the new medical center, which the Sterling Foundation had bought out and fully modernized for its family and corporate employees, it felt like eternal summer. Ali sat on a plush sofa in the spacious lobby, waiting for her appointment. She was wearing a comfortable cashmere dress, her hair neatly styled. There was no trace left of the exhausted nurse in the faded scrubs. Only her eyes remained the same, attentive and a little anxious, due to constant nervous breakdowns, lack of money, and working herself to the bone. She had never been able to get her proper prenatal screenings done on time. At the old hospital, they simply refused to examine her properly. And she had neither the time nor the energy to go to a free public clinic. The office door opened. And Dr. Elias Barnes walked into the lobby. The elderly doctor looked well-rested. Color had returned to his cheeks. And that same kind, understanding squint was back in his eyes. After his massive heart attack, Ian had personally transferred him to the best cardiology unit in the city, fully paid for his rehabilitation, and then offered him the position of chief of medicine at his brand new clinic. Well, kids. Hope I didn't keep you waiting too long. Dr. Barnes smiled. walking up to them. Come on in. Come on in. It's finally time to meet our future heir. The ultrasound room was equipped with state-of-the-art technology. Allie lay on the exam table. Ian sat on a stool next to her, taking her hand out of habit. His palm was hot and reassuring. Dr. Barnes applied clear gel to Allie's belly and placed the transducer against her skin. The lights in the room were dimmed. A moving black and white image appeared on the large wall-mounted monitor. In the absolute silence of the room, a fast, rhythmic sound echoed. Thump. 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 Allie stopped breathing. She had waited for this moment for so long. That steady heartbeat made her forget every terror she had endured. Dr. Barnes carefully moved the wand. His face grew focused. He frowned slightly, peering at the monitor. Then shifted the wand a little to the right and pressed a few buttons on the control panel. At that exact moment, a second, slightly higher and faster sound joined the first rhythmic beat. They sounded together like a complex, flawless clockwork mechanism. The doctor slowly lowered his hand. A wide, warm smile lit up his face. He looked at Ian, then shifted his gaze to Allie. I'm an experienced doctor. Doctor, Barnes said with a slight rasp in his voice. But you kids sure know how to surprise a guy. What is it? Doctor Barnes. Ian's voice trembled. He leaned forward, unable to tear his dark eyes from the screen. Is everything okay? Why did the sound change? Because there are two of them. Mr. Sterling. The doctor set the wand aside and wiped his hands with a paper towel. Ali. Ian. You have two heartbeats. Twins. A boy and a girl. They're developing perfectly. Weights are completely normal. A thick silence hung in the room. The only sound was the rapid double beat of hearts echoing from the machine's speakers. Allie covered her face with her free hand. Hot tears rolled down her cheeks. She tried to say something, but a knot tightened in her throat. For so many months she had fought for one baby, shielding it with her own hands from the cold and the cruelty of people, and there turned out to be two. Ian sat completely paralyzed. The man who confidently solved the most complex corporate problems couldn't utter a single word right now. His breathing became ragged, very carefully, as if terrified of hurting her. He wrapped both his hands around Allie's palm and pressed his lips to it. His broad shoulders shook. Ian lowered his head, burying his face in her hands. With her free hand, Allie stroked his dark hair, running her fingers through the short strands. She felt moisture on her skin. He was crying. For the first time since they had met, this strong, unbreakable man allowed himself to show absolute, unguarded joy. We'll survive, Allie whispered, looking at the monitor where two tiny dots pulsed. Now. We will definitely survive everything. The end of February was clear and freezing. The sun blinded the eyes, reflecting off the freshly fallen, pure snow. Near the main entrance of an elite perinatal center stood several luxury cars. On the wide steps, shifting from foot to foot in nervous anticipation, stood Alexander Sterling, the billionaire patriarch, accustomed to tailored suits and boardroom negotiations. Looked soft and grandfatherly today in a warm wool coat and a fluffy scarf. Standing next to him was Tamara. Even just a month at the retreat had worked a miracle. The woman stood up straight. Her face looked refreshed, and the eternal, hunted anxiety had vanished from her eyes. She carefully cradled a massive bouquet of white roses in her arms. The heavy glass doors slid open. Ian walked out onto the steps. In each arm, he carefully with unbelievable gentleness, held a bundled swaddle tied with wide ribbons. Walking next to him was Allie. She looked tired, a little pale, but her eyes shone with a deep, serene peace. Alexander Sterling took a hesitant step forward. He reached out a trembling hand and gently pulled back the edge of the blanket on one of the bundles. Seeing the tiny, sleeping face of his grandson, the older man let out a loud exhale and turned away, hastily wiping a tear. Finally, his family was whole again. Tamara walked up to her daughter. The women hugged each other tightly, sincerely, without needing any words. All the bridges to the painful past had been burned. Only the future remained. The drivers opened the car doors. The freezing air pleasantly pinched their cheeks. Ian stopped by the open door of the Maybach. He waited for Allie to settle into the warm leather interior and carefully handed her one bundle. Then he got in himself, settling the second one on his lap. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the hospital grounds behind. Beyond the tinted windows, snow-covered trees and building facades flashed by. Inside the cabin, it was warm and quiet, smelling of the crisp frost and a light scent of baby lotion. Ian looked at his sleeping daughter in his arms, then shifted his gaze to Allie, who was gently adjusting the tiny hat on their son's head. With his free hand, he touched Allie's cheek. She turned her head and looked into his eyes. "You know." His voice was deep and calm, filling the space of the car. "When I woke up alone on the street, I didn't even know my own name. I had nothing but darkness and fear." Ian ran his thumb along her jawline. "You saved me in that freezing hallway. Not just from the cold. You made me remember what it means to be human." He looked down at the two small bundles. "And now, you are my only light." Allie covered his hand with her palm and pressed her cheek against it. She didn't need to defend herself, run, or prove her right to happiness ever again. The long winter, which had tested their strength so brutally, was finally over. Spring was ahead. Dear friends, thank you for listening to this story to the very end. We hope that Allie and Ian's journey touched your heart. It's very important for us to know what emotions and thoughts it brought out in you. Do you think a mother's cruel actions can ever be justified by her deep fear of poverty? And if you were in Allie's place, could you forgive such a betrayal by your own flesh and blood? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Drop a like if this story resonated with you. It's the best way to support us and help this story find its way to others. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with your friends so you never miss another touching story. Check out our page for even more captivating life stories.